Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of Interviewing a Broncos Fan. I was going to interview somebody else and he bailed out last second. So this is Chris, and Chris is saving the night. He has come in clutch in the moment, like Brandon McManus during the Super Bowl 50 run. He is here to save the day. So, Chris, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to start all of these off by just asking how you became a fan and how long you've been a fan, and things like that. So how long have you been a Broncos fan, and um, how long has that been going on?
Well, you're making me old thinking about this because it's been about 40 years that I've been a Broncos fan. So I remember 1984 season. The Broncos made the playoffs. I think they might have even won the division, and they lost to the Steelers in the divisional round. And I remember crying and my mother consoling me as I cried because they and I don't know, I was like 7 years old, whatever, and uh, it would be a different story if I was like 15 and I was crying. But you know what? Even as grown men, sometimes we want to cry over these playoff losses. But that one back then was, that was rough. But I've been a Broncos fan ever since then. I lived in Denver when I was a kid. I don't live in Denver anymore, but lived in the area. And especially at that time, it was kind of impossible not to be a Broncos fan if you were in the area because of Elway, because people just love football in the state anyway. But with Elway and just kind of the excitement around the franchise, it was hard not to be a Broncos fan. It's not like you were going to watch baseball back then. All we had was the Denver Bears. We didn't even have the Rockies back then. So I was a Denver Broncos fan, true and true since then. And then, suffered through those Super Bowl losses. And, then finally 97, 97, 98. Yes, it's Gibson SG. Somebody's peeping at my guitars back here. So yes,
That's Bill,
yeah.
big fan of the channel.
That SG is older than that Broncos season. That's 1980. But anyway, finally pulled through in 97, 98, and just been with the team ever since. And even through these very difficult years lately, just been, still a fan.
It has been really difficult lately, and it's cool getting a little contrast here because the last guy I interviewed was 22 years old, and I'm 30. So when I talk to somebody that's 22, it doesn't seem like a big difference, but it really is because his earliest memories was the Peyton Manning era, and that was, of course, one of the most amazing things I've seen in my lifetime. Definitely the most amazing. My first quarterback I remember was Brian Greasy, and I was a big Brian Greasy guy, and then Jake the Snake Plumber, and those were my earliest memories. But then I went into the Peyton Manning era. So you could say that, I was a part of the Pat Bowlen era of being relevant. And for somebody that's 22 years old, they barely remember the Manning stuff. And the rest of their life has been missing the playoffs, not being relevant. And that's just not what we're about.
Yeah.
And it's so different. So I think I was born in 94, and I became a really big fan like around the year 2000. That's when I remember watching the Broncos, and I was very passionate about it. I grew up in Wisconsin, so it's not normal to not be a Packers fan in Wisconsin, but the Broncos just really stuck. And my friend who became a Broncos fan too, we both are diehard fans for over 20 years now. So it's been really, really amazing. But yeah, the last 9 years have been rough. And do you think that in this span, there was a quarterback that maybe you believed in that was going to get us out of the funk? Because they say that hope, is the most dangerous thing a fan can have. And I could honestly say that every single one of those 9 years, I've had a legitimate reason to have hope going into the next year, whether it was Russell Wilson or Sean Payton or Joe Flacco or Case Keenum or we just won the Super Bowl. Like, there's always been some kind of, reason for that, and I know some Bronco fans, especially the ones I see on internet, we're pretty divided, with people that are hopeful and people that are, "Hey, that's stupid to be hopeful. We're trash," you know? It's all over the place. So, where do
Mhm.
you see yourself kind of, um, on that, that part?
Well, you know, so that's a good question because, it's I think particularly now with the internet, because, I'm old enough to remember watching sports without the internet, and we used to, the season would come along, we just got our butts kicked. I don't know if I can say ass or what, but
Yeah, yeah, you
anyway,
can say ass.
we got our ass kicked by the Giants and then, but hey, it's a new season. We're, 1986, we're coming back, and everybody's optimistic. It's like they say in baseball, right? The springtime optimism, right? That's should be part of sports, I think, and it kind of has dissipated a little bit, I think, because of the internet, because you can hear all of this hive mind of negativity on the internet that you hear sometimes, of like, oh well, we're just gonna suck anyway, and it's like, dude, it's like it's July, like let's get excited about the team, let's let's have some hope. I mean, we're 0-0 just like everybody else, like, and so I don't really buy into that, no matter how bad things might seem. I never buy into this super Debbie Downer kind of stuff. I never buy into that. Now, I do try to be realistic. So, like, for example, this year, I think only the most optimistic fan is going to say, well, we're a playoff team. It's like, but there's things to get excited about. I mean, we got a rookie quarterback who might be pretty good, right? I mean, they seem to believe in him. So, there's still things to get excited about, even though you don't this year you don't really think like, oh, it's Super Bowl or bust. Like, nobody's really thinking that. But
Right.
there's still reason to get excited. And just going back years, and you talked about quarterbacks. We had Elway for so many years, and then of course, there was Greasy, who had his ups and downs. I believed in him, but ultimately just kind of couldn't get it done. That season, his best season, you remember Gus Frerotte actually was in there a lot and won some games for us and helped us get to the playoffs. And then I remember that game that our ex tight end Shannon Sharp. We went into Baltimore, and Shannon Sharp, and Ray Lewis just kind of spanked us and showed us where we were at as a franchise. And then of course, the different guys over the years. Plummer, I like Plummer. I think a lot of fans like Plummer. I
Yeah, I
didn't
still love
really didn't really agree with the Jay Cutler, I should say, with that decision to put him in there at that time. I guess Shanahan was just trying to get a spark, but didn't work out. And then I kind of liked Kyle Orton. Kyle Orton could sling it. The old Kyle Orton and Brandon Lloyd. Kyle Orton to Brandon Lloyd. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
That was a pretty good combo there for a couple of years. And Kyle Orton was slinging it. He was not a bad quarterback by any means.
He had his moments.
He has moments, but then they weren't winning. They were, bottom line, they weren't winning games. And then we had Tebow come in, and the Tebow season was magical. I'm not like one of these Tebow guys who's just like, Tebow is, the Messiah, but that was a fun season to watch. That was
Oh,
such a
yeah.
fun.
That was one of the most fun seasons. I would say that in 2012 was a lot of fun. 2015 was fun in its own way because it was just the most unlikely of the 4 years for Manning to win a Super Bowl. So the fact that he did that year, I totally agree. Though that was a lot of fun. I actually went to the same high school as Tim Tebow in Jacksonville, and
Oh,
my
okay.
brother played football, and he was a part of the program. and he was just such a big face in Jacksonville, and they were, I mean, Nice was winning every game like 56-0. I mean, it was just
Mm.
Tim Tebow, the ball, he would just snap the ball, and if he wanted to run with it, he was going to score every time. It was ridiculous. And then he went on to play with the Gators, and I remember he came back because there's this big rivalry, Nice versus Bartram Trail every year, and Nathan Peterman actually went to Bartram Trail.
Oh, okay.
Um, and he came back for that game, and I got his autograph, and it was only a couple months later the Broncos drafted him, and I was like, it was like a perfect situation for me, right? Because I was already a big fan, and then he became a Bronco, and like it's funny because as you get older, and maybe it was the internet, like you said, where people become more pessimistic about everything, but it's funny listening to you talk about Brian Greasy, because the way I looked at it as a kid was like, it didn't matter what Brian Greasy was or how good he was. Like, he was the Denver Broncos quarterback, and that meant that I was going to wear his jersey and be proud of him. Like, there was
Mm,
no like thinking like, do I support him? Do I like him? It's like, he's my quarterback. Of course I support him. Of course I love him.
right.
And that's kind of changed a little bit where we're much more opinionated. I don't know if that's just part of being, a little willfully ignorant as a kid. You just don't really know what's going on, or what that is. But I think a lot of our quarterbacks, I have gotten behind them. I can't think of a single quarterback that I didn't believe in. I even Drew Lock. I really believed in Drew Lock. I still do. I think he might get an opportunity with the Giants, and Bo Nix now, is our guy. And it's a little different because this is the first quarterback of, the 15 we've had since Manning. This is the first one that Sean Payton picked. So what are your views on Sean Payton? Do you still see him as one of the best coaches in the league?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting with Peyton because I mean, it really we've had kind of a. I mean, let's face it, like we've kind of had a crash and burn these past couple of years, right? Because Manning was gone, and then we kind of bring in these guys who probably should kind of be bridge quarterbacks, but we were saying like, this is the guy, we're quarterback away. Like remember after Manning, because we won a Super Bowl when Manning was like on his last legs, right? And
Right.
everybody thought, well, we can just put a guy in there and we can, this defense is good enough and we'll win it again, and so that didn't really happen, of course. And we have this succession of quarterbacks, and a lot of the guys that we brought in are these guys who, um, you know, I mean, it's kind of rude to say that they were like retreads, but these were guys who like maybe had some success somewhere else and just kind of flamed out in one way or another. Somebody else didn't want them, and we brought them in, and we said, "This guy, this is the guy. This Case Keenum, he's the guy. You know, Flacco, he's the guy. And then we drafted a couple of guys who we didn't really spend a lot of draft capital on them, but we picked a couple of guys, and even don't forget old Chad Kelly, who ended up in somebody's house drunk or whatever it was.
That
The
was
guy,
Von Miller's fault.
yeah, we'll blame it on Von Miller's Halloween party, right? But so there's so many like things over those years, and I gotta say, like at no time did I ever fully believe like this is the guy. Like I probably had what the kids call hopium, right? I probably had that like little bit of hope, but it just wasn't. I kind of knew like, all right, maybe this guy can win some games for us, but really we're just going to run the ball and play defense, and hopefully that's how we're going to win. And so we kind of keep kicking the can down the road, so to speak, of like we're just a quarterback away. So then we have this year where we hire Nate Hackett, who at the time there were rumblings that like we're only doing this because we're trying to get Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
And maybe I was like a George Payton apologist because I just thought, well, no, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't hire this guy just to try to get Aaron Rodgers. But now you kind of look back at the history of it all, and you kind of see what the Jets did and how the Jets ended up with Aaron Rodgers, and you kind of think, yeah, maybe we hired that guy just because we thought we were going to get Aaron Rodgers. And so, and of course, it didn't work out. And of course, I'm forgetting the elephant in the room, which is Russell Wilson, which is, we spend all this money on Russell Wilson, all this draft capital, get rid of some players. And so all of a sudden we're just all in on like Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett, and like people were pumped. I mean, I don't know about you. That season going into that
Oh,
first Russell Wilson season,
yes. Yes, I was
right?
at that game week 1 in Seattle,
Oh, wow.
and, I was just telling, because I'm trying to interview a lot of Broncos fans and just kinda see where everyone's at, different age groups, and this is a lot of fun, but I was telling him, I was like, watching that moment between Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson, both of them not know what to do, watching the clock tick down, and then eventually McManus running out on the other side of the 50-yard line. I mean, even I was this was a road game. Everybody was shocked. Like, not just Broncos fans, like the whole stadium was like, "What are they doing?" And that was the moment where I was like, "This is not Peyton Manning, right? Peyton Manning would never be lost in the sauce like that." And Nathaniel Hackett was, you know, over his skis on this whole thing. I think it became pretty clear. And it's funny because that moment of excitement, it was so, like, I remember where I was when that trade happened, and most people do. That was the moment where all of the pain and suffering from the post Manning era was gonna it's all coming to an end now. And it's so cruel how wrong we were about that. I think that one definitely hurts the most, and I don't have a problem with, Peyton bringing him in, but how do you feel about him paying him all that money before he played, a
Well,
game? Because, some people are like, "Oh, that was stupid," but it's like all we knew was that, what he did in Seattle for 10 years. He was a Hall of Famer.
yeah.
Who could have predicted this kind of downfall? I don't feel
Yeah,
like that's fair.
it's stupid in hindsight, of course, but and I realized that I took a very circuitous route in trying to answer your question about Sean Payton, and I'm just talking about all that leading up to it. But I'm just trying to put it in context of like, yeah, when we got Wilson, and even when we paid him the contract, nobody at that time was like, "Oh, this is stupid." Like, and these
Right.
people who say like, "Oh, that was a dumb trade and that was a dumb contract," and all, where were you when that was happening? Because I didn't see it. I mean, I'm on the Broncos subreddit, and I kind of get a feel for what's out there. Nobody was saying that. Nobody. People
Right.
were like, "George Payton is a genius. This guy, George Payton for president." Like, we all were on board. We all believed like this is the guy, and of course, like, turned out to be just horribly wrong. And then you bring in Sean Payton, give up more draft capital for him, and then it doesn't work with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton. So now we're in it, man. We're in the mud, like it's rough, but I do I do believe in Sean Payton. I have no choice. I'm a Broncos fan, so of course I believe in Sean Payton. But I do, and I know a lot of people out there probably have already like soured on Sean Payton for whatever reason. I mean, right? Because like we were saying, it's the internet, and there's people who will say, "Oh, we should have never, given up draft picks for this guy, and he's washed up, and he doesn't know what he's doing." Well, you know what? He's been the coach for a year, and so he does have the Super Bowl pedigree. He's a great coach, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I'll tell you what, I believe that in pulling that band-aid off and getting rid of Russ and moving forward, drafting a quarterback, I believe for the first time in probably a few years, I believe that we're building in towards something. And the difference this year is that we're not telling ourselves like we're a playoff team. Like we've got the quarterback and we're a playoff team. Here we go. Like I don't know if too many people are realistically saying we're a playoff team. We're 8-9 team last year. Justin Simmons is gone. Starting center's gone. Maybe you don't think Cushenberry was that great of a center, but still, we let him walk. We got rid of Jerry Jeudy. We got rid of Josie Jewell, right? Like you take an 8-win team and probably downgrade it a little bit. It would be very optimistic to say that this is a playoff team. However, I'm optimistic because I feel that regardless of what happens this year, I feel that we did well enough in the draft where I'm excited to see where this is going. And I want to see Peyton coach these guys up. And I'm drinking the Bo Nix Kool-Aid. I'm all about it. I think he looks pretty good to me. I mean, I'm not one of these guys breaking down film and telling you every nuance of quarterback play and all of that. I just know that he passes the eye test for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen. I'm
Well,
excited to see that they're building something.
yeah, and when you look at the kind of offense that Sean likes to run, I did a little deep dive into this because I at first thought the Bo Nix draft pick was pretty high. I felt that way because that's what I've been told by draft analysts, right? But you find out during the draft that there's also an internal process going on inside the building, and it's not necessarily a reflection of what's going on outside the building, because they asked him, why didn't you move back? Maybe Denver would have got a second round draft pick, but Sean was like, that was our guy. Like if you have an opportunity to get a franchise quarterback at number 12 overall, why would you risk that for a third round pick? Like, it's not worth it. Now, when I look at the roster, the NFL actually just released the projected starters for the Broncos. It looks really good. You got Bo Nix, Javonte Williams. They just drafted Estime. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time. Cortland Sutton, hopefully he shows up to training camp. Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims. They ended up drafting Franklin, Bo Nix's number one wide receiver. Greg Dulcich, if he can stay healthy, I still believe in him. But that's a big if. Garrett Bowles, Ben Powers, Quinn Martinez, Mike McGlinchey, and then at center, Sam Mustipher. I look at this team and I see a lot of players. Like, I see a lot of good football players, and I don't know if that's just because they're all Broncos and I'm seeing them in that light, but I just feel like all of these players together with a good quarterback could actually be a top 15 offense in the league.
Well,
And
you mentioned the offensive line, which they more or less kept together, and I mentioned that they let their starting center go. But yeah, they've got some other guys at center. They've got Forsyth, the guy they drafted last year, who was Bo Nix's center, and then you mentioned Mustipher. But maybe I didn't catch this, but did you mention they got that guy from the Jets on the defensive line?
no, I'm trying to remember what was his. Is that the John Franklin Myers?
Yes, and so they bolstered the defensive line a little bit. The offensive line is not bad by any means.
By any means, and they added a
So
good edge too.
yeah, so you got. I mean, so maybe your offensive and defensive lines are not bad, and you've got some skilled players. And yeah, there's I'm sure there's people who will just poo-poo all over that and say, well, they're whatever, they're not as good as they were last year. And yes, I agree. Like, it's not great that we don't have Justin Simmons anymore and all that, but still, it's not completely bereft of talent. I think a lot of it just depends on Bo Nix, and if
Exactly.
Bo Nix is what Peyton seems to think he is.
Yeah,
That's
I agree. Like even the I hear what you're saying. Like you'd be hard pressed to say that this is a more talented roster than they had last year. But I would even say I would just pause that because if Bo Nix is better than the quarterback play we got out of Russell Wilson last year, then it's not just that Bo Nix is better than Russell Wilson. It's that maybe Bo Nix makes Josh Reynolds really good. Maybe uh, Sean Payton gets Marvin Mims more involved because he's a slot receiver and Russ couldn't really throw over the middle of the field. So now that opens up. So you get to start tapping into the star potential in some of these players that have been kind of limited, along with Sean Payton as a play caller because of the deficiencies that Russell Wilson has. So I still think that if Bo Nix can, and they say he's the most game ready of all the quarterbacks that were drafted because he's played in multiple systems, because he's, I think, a 6-year college player, that led college football in a completion percentage. And they say, oh, that's because he throws a bunch of 5-yard passes right out. And it's like, that's what Sean's going to ask him to do. That it translates
right.
very well.
And the other thing with Knicks is that, like, again, I mean, I'm not going to claim to be this guy. I'm not Kurt Warner breaking down the film of,
Right. Me neither.
but like, but I've watched a lot of his stuff, especially since they drafted him. Right, like I've digested a lot of Bo Nix content, and he's not just throwing bubble screens all day. I mean, there's passes down the field, and he has great anticipation on his throws. His arm strength looks pretty good to me, and it's not just a bunch of like screens and little dinky slants and stuff like that. That's just not true. Like, and I think people just maybe haven't watched a lot of him. And I think a lot of his bigger games, like if you watch like the USC game, he's throwing these passes that are, 10 yards in the air and they end up being an 80-yard touchdown. And you say, well, that's scheme and that's the receiver and that's all that. Well, he still hit that wide open receiver. He hit exactly the receiver he was supposed to hit. And it's like, we want to punish a guy because he threw an 80-yard touchdown pass just because not all of those yards were in the air. I guess, yeah, I'll just reiterate. The guy looks pretty good to me. And we don't know how a college quarterback will translate to the NFL. You never know. But I'm pretty optimistic myself.
Well, it's also they feel like they have to have strengths and they have to have weaknesses. Um, so sometimes I feel like they'll stretch a weakness. Like they'll say Bo Nix doesn't have arm strength, but then you see 60-yard passes on film. And it's like, okay, well, what do you mean? Like,
Right.
just because he didn't do it all the time doesn't mean that he can't do it. That's two different conversations.
Right. I mean, he doesn't have what they call like the electric like arm talent.
Gunslinger.
He's not Josh Allen. Like he's not going to just like flick it off his back foot 80 yards or whatever. But you don't really need to do that to be a successful quarterback in the NFL.
Right.
Peyton
Zach
Manning,
Wilson can do that.
Tom Brady, like there's guys who don't do that. Who there's a lot more to. I mean, even Drew Brees. I mean, which is a good guy to bring up, being that he was Sean Payton's quarterback. I mean, people always used to say Drew Brees did not have a strong arm. That's one of the reasons the Chargers gave up on him. Is that he didn't have arm strength.
Yeah,
But
he was a
Joe
quick
Montana
decision.
didn't have arm strength, right? It's just that kind of stuff. It's like that's not going to make or break him. I think there's a lot of other stuff that might make or break him, but I don't think the arm strength is a concern, not from what I've seen.
Yeah, and the coaches, these offensive coaches, Andy Reid, I'll use Kyle Shanahan as an example. When they drafted Trey Lance, number 3 overall, they asked how he did after a preseason game. They asked Kyle Shanahan, and he was like, I don't know. He didn't do anything I asked him to do. He kept running. And you kind of learned a little bit about Kyle Shanahan in that moment where he's like, I have made the perfect play based on the defense that they're in, this is what you have to do. You just have to trust me and do what I'm telling you to do. 3 seconds, look there. If it's not there, the ball goes there. And then you get these quarterbacks that they wanna run, they wanna try to make a play, they wanna hold the ball long and try to, you know, take a shot downfield. And these coaches that put so much time and energy into their play calling, the art of it, they want a quarterback to do exactly what they're being asked of, and that's why it wasn't Trey Lance, it was Brock Purdy that came in, and then they used it as a weakness, like, "Oh, he's just, what did they say? A game manager?" Uh,
Mhm.
and it's like, that's a quarterback's job, is to manage the game, but he was able to do what Kyle Shanahan asked him to do, and I felt like Drew Brees was like he was a quick decision maker, high IQ, pre-snap diagnosis, all of that stuff. Where Russell Wilson, you saw that moment where he was getting screamed at on the sideline after that. What game was that? Do you remember that when he went? It was they were about to score. And then they had to settle for a field goal on the goal line. And then Sean was chewing Russell Wilson out on the sideline. It was all over the news the next day.
Was it the Lions game? I feel like it was the Lions game,
I think
but I
it
could be
was the
wrong.
Lions. It was definitely late in the season. I think.
They got their ass kicked by the Lions,
Oh my
like,
gosh, that was
and
embarrassing.
so for all of the, like, good moments of that season, and there was a stretch of it where it was pretty enjoyable and fun to watch, but don't forget, like, we got our ass kicked by the Lions, who were a good, like, Super Bowl caliber team. And I think that that was pretty telling of, like, where the team was really at that time. If you take out some of those Russell Wilson hero ball plays, which were great and which were fun to watch,
Yeah,
um,
it was Cortland
but
Sutton too. I mean,
Portland Sutton. But if you take out, like, those Wilson to Sutton kind of almost
right?
near miraculous plays in some of those games, like the Bills game, like, we don't win that Bills game, right? So there's just, yeah, there's a lot of stuff where it was pretty clear Wilson was really good at making something out of nothing, but he was really bad at making something out of something. In other
Yes,
words,
yes,
in
very
other words,
well said.
in other words, like, like, execute the offense, like, that was not his thing. That was not his thing.
You said that so well. That was the experience, and I think what Sean loves about Bo Nix is that he feels like, okay, he's actually going to do what I ask him to do. I was a flight attendant before I was in the military. I was a naval air crewman, and I just retired about 4 or 5 months ago,
Oh, okay.
and I've always loved flying, and I remember the first airline I interviewed for, they asked me if they did like this, what do you call a group interview? And I was like, oh, I'm not going to get the job. They didn't really get to know me. They called me in for a second interview, and I went in and they asked if I had experience. And I said no. And in my heart, I felt like I'm definitely not getting this job. And they were like, that's good. And they're like, "No, we don't want you to bring bad habits over from these other airlines. We want to shape you and mold you to our standard." And I feel in a way that Bo Nix and Sean Payton, like Sean, when Sean got the job, Russ had his own staff team, his own quarterbacks coach, his own way of doing things. Now he gets a guy like Bo Nix who's just ready to be molded into whatever Sean wants. And I think the most important thing for Sean was that we have a guy that can make high IQ plays and make quick decisions, and he has that. So I really do feel like the sky's the limit. I have full faith in both of them, and I actually do believe that this season might be. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna maybe go into the playoffs or anything like that, but I think with Sean Payton, our floor is about 8 wins, no matter what. I just think that high of the coach that he is. And I looked at last season. I was like, if he can pull 8 wins out of that team, with the way they were playing, why can't he? I felt like that was his floor. Would you think that that's fair?
Well, I certainly understand where you're coming from with that, and I would say that before the draft, And of course, we're all, when we see things happening in the off season, there's lots of gloom and doom, right? Especially this off season because we're paying like we're paying a quarterback, $50 million not to play for us, or it's I mean, over the 2 years, it's like 90 million just not to play, just to go
So
away.
much money.
And so you're like, and then you get rid of Justin Simmons. You cut Justin Simmons, and like after that happened, I think there was a lot of people, myself included, are thinking like, well, like we're just in tank mode right now, like, and we're just gonna suffer through a really bad season. Now, in the following weeks, we made a couple of signings. The Josh Reynolds signings, I think the Josh Reynolds signing is real positive. I think it's good.
I
I
love it.
think I believe we had a good draft, and I know people will say, "Oh, you drafted Knicks too high," but if you look at the situation, all the quarterbacks were gone. We need a quarterback. We wanted a quarterback. Apparently, that's the guy that we wanted, and the Raiders are right behind us. Everybody say they want Penix. Penix is gone. Um, and I believe there was a report that came out a little bit later that the Rams, who I believe drafted 19th, the Rams were going to draft Bo Nix, 100%. They were going to draft. So when you say like, oh, well, we could wait, no, I don't think so.
The Raiders probably would have as well.
If the Raiders didn't do it, I think the Rams would have.
Right.
So that's so that was our guy, and we got our guy. And then I think the rest of the draft was pretty solid from what I can tell. And so now there's a little more optimism of like, okay, we're building something. I don't really have an expectation in terms of wins. I think it's kind of freeing to not have that expectation because I don't feel that what we're building right now is like, let's go to the playoffs right now. It's like, we got a young quarterback. Let's develop him. We've got some other young players. Like, let's try to develop something from the ground up that fits Sean Payton's vision, and let's see where it can go. And I don't really have like a win total in mind. And if they win 4 games, honestly, like, I can tell you this honestly, if they win 4 games and they look like they're building towards something and they've just got holes, then I'm okay with that. If they win 4 games and they just look terrible and it's like Knicks is terrible and they just suck, then okay, then I'm not happy with that. But
Well, at
but
least we could get a quarterback then.
right, well, yeah, then yeah, if things go really bad, then it's like okay, maybe we'll try another quarterback. But as far as the win total this year, I don't know. To be honest, maybe 8's a little high in my opinion, but I could be absolutely wrong, and you could be right, Kyle, and we could be we'll be celebrating that 8-9 8-9 record. We'll see
Yeah.
what happens.
Well, it's not. I know there's a lot of Kool-Aid that I'm drinking, but I would say even if I were to remove the Denver Broncos as factor and just talk about Sean Payton when Drew Brees retired, there was 3 quarterbacks that started that season with the Saints. I can't remember one of his name. I think it was Eli Booker, and then there was Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, and it was just kind of really awkward of a year, but Sean still had that team playing for the playoffs week 18. So I've just seen Sean prove that, even when things are down or in transition, he has a way of game planning and at least, coming away with something. I would be surprised if he won 5 games or less. And that's just because of how highly I view Sean Payton.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you might be absolutely right, and I hope you're right. And like, so I mean, and things could go the other way too. I mean, of course, I have these fantasies of like, well, we go 14-3. Like Knicks is going to come in. He's gonna be CJ Stroud, right? He's just going to come in. He's gonna be, or even like Herbert a couple of years ago, right? Justin Herbert, same
yeah,
school, right?
same
And he
school.
came in, he was lighting it up pretty quick, right? It could happen. It could
Yeah,
happen.
Man, I'm not that excited, but I would love to be that excited. Like man, I really hope that becomes a reality because I mean, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes in our division. Is there a part of you? I mean, this is going to be a very honest question, but is there a part of you that feels like it doesn't really matter what we do? The Chiefs are in our division.
Yes and no. I mean,
It
last
creeps
year,
in for me. It creeps in. I get rid of it, you know, I I curse it, but it creeps in a little bit. It's like you're going down this roster and you're trying to and then you're like, "The Chiefs, though. What are we gonna do about the Chiefs?"
well, so whether we like it or not, like, so Mahomes and Reed are kind of the Brady and Belichick of our time. You
Yes.
know, pains me to say it, but it's kind of just the reality right now. And the reason I say that is because you remember when the Patriots were, and I'm old enough to remember when the Patriots were terrible, right? Where they were like kind of a poverty franchise. I mean, yeah, they went to the Super Bowl in '85 and just got killed by the Bears, the '85 Bears, and then it was '96. They went to the Super Bowl, Parcells and Bledsoe, and they were scrappy. They gave the Packers a game, but nobody, I mean, nobody believed in the Patriots. As the Patriots were like, God, it's like an analog for the Patriots back then would be kind of like what the Dolphins are now. Then the Dolphins, of course, at one time were really good, but the Dolphins for the past like 30, almost 40 years have not. They just
Right.
kind of like they're sort of there, but they're not,
Yeah,
and that's
kinda
kind
like
of
the
how the
Lions too
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, with the
until
Lions are
now.
even worse. I mean, the Lions had the 0-16 and all that, but the
Yeah, just like
Patriots,
a mediocre kind of
yeah. And so I'm off on a tangent here about the Patriots, but when Brady and Belichick came, and they established that dynasty. I mean, they went through all of these ups and downs and personnel kind of coming and going, and like, and there would always be, it's like, well, this year the Patriots finally suck, right? Like they're finally gonna lose the AFC East, and it's like, nope, they just do it again and again, and that's kind of where we're at with the Chiefs, unfortunately. That because yeah, when they lost Tyreek Hill, you're like, well, they a lot of this is just because Tyreek Hill, it's like a cheat code. He can just run down the field, but no, you get rid of Tyreek Hill, and it's like, yeah, their receivers suck, but you just throw it to Kelsey, and Mahomes will just run a scramble on 4th and 12, and it's always something with those guys, right? They're always pulled the rabbit out of their hat somehow,
yeah,
and
20
so yeah, you do kind of believe that it's like no matter how bad things are, no matter the fact that they don't seem to have any receivers, and they just traded their best cornerback, right? Denarius Sneed or whatever his name is.
Yeah, yeah, to Tennessee.
Yeah, so it's like you think, well, okay, finally,
L'Jarius, yeah,
you
L'Jarius.
know, they're the Jerry's, yeah, I don't know, but so finally they're like they're weak, right? They're weak. And it seemed that way last year. It seemed that way last year. Remember, like they lost to the Lions week one, Broncos beat them, and finally it's like finally the Chiefs are weak. Finally finally they will be vanquished. Even
Yeah,
in the Super Bowl, they very well could have lost that game to the Niners, but nope, they pull it out somehow.
they find a
And
way. Even when Mahomes was having a meltdown during the season,
yeah,
all those games where he's screaming.
the game where he was so mad at the refs. What game was that?
Oh, that was like Christmas, I think, or
Yeah, but that was
Thanksgiving.
memed. That was memed so much that
He
and his
yeah,
face was so yeah, it was so delightful to
that
watch.
was
But
about, so Kadarius Toney was lined up offsides, and
right,
I gotta say, I was watching that play, and I was actually disappointed that the penalty was called, and as a Broncos fan, just because it was one of the coolest plays I've ever seen in my life. Like, you throw it to Travis Kelce, and he has the balls to throw the
no,
football.
it was a good play. and it is super rare to see like a wide receiver on offense called for offsides. But you know what? I think that's a sign of just like how bad the Chiefs receivers room is now, because that's like a high school thing. Like you go to a high school
Absolutely.
game and the receiver lines up. Yeah, exactly. Looks at the ref and he you know, and so it's just, I mean, it's amateur hour like with those receivers, but again, like somehow they always pull it out. And so, yes, I do kind of agree that there's this belief of like, no matter what we do, the Chiefs will find a way. And that will be true until it's not true.
Until it's not. We do have Bill. He's a huge fan of the show, and he said Chris is right though about them. They sucked for years. He's a big Giants fan, so he said even when the Patriots were good, it didn't cause me any problems.
Well, true.
But
Yeah. Two things there.
he said it's nice to have someone in my age bracket on the show. I appreciate the knowledge of history. Good on you, Chris.
Well,
Um,
thank you. Thank you, Bill. And those were fun games to watch, those Giant games. They were very fun.
So a little pivot here. Pat Bolin, rest in peace. That was probably, um, I would imagine you were a big Pat Bolin guy your whole lifetime. He was the owner, right?
He was. And, it's kind of funny when Pat came around, he's this billionaire from Canada, and he would stroll the sidelines in his big mink coat.
Oh yeah,
People don't remember this, but people thought he was an asshole. Like, yeah, and people forget this, but people are like, "Who is this rich asshole with his mink coat?" Because it's Denver, we're not. It's more of a blue collar, especially back then. It's more of a blue collar thing, and this guy, his aviator sunglasses, like, who's this guy? But we kept winning. We kept winning. We won Super Bowls. And this one's for John. And like, so by the
yes.
time, obviously, by the time you get towards the end of his career, there's no one in Denver who didn't. There he is with the mink coat and sunglasses. But by the time he gets to the end of his career, there's no one in Denver who didn't love or at least respect Pat Bolin for everything that he did for us, as fans. So and you can really see in his absence, right? You can see from when he had to step away
Yes.
until now that you can see the effect of his absence, and we're not the same franchise, unfortunately.
It was not a like when everything you watched on Pat Bolin, and I loved Pat Bolin. When I was young, every Christmas I would ask for Broncos stuff, and a lot of times I would get kind of like a history of the Denver Broncos, and Pat Bolin was the star in a lot of these, and everything he did for broadcast booth, getting Monday Night Football started. I heard stories about because he ran marathons and he would wake up at 5 a.m. and be in the rehab rooms with the athletes, like working out with them. He was just so involved, such a hands-on owner. It wasn't like, yeah, this is just a billionaire making a business decision. Like it really felt like Pat Bolin cared about the Denver Broncos. Like he lived for the Denver Broncos. That's all he wanted. And it was not just part of his life, it was his life. And then
Absolutely.
in come the owners of Walmart, which is kind of the contrast I'm making right now. How do you feel about the Walter Penner Group? How do you feel like it's going so far? Condoleezza Rice, like this whole Bermuda grass, new scoreboard. The money's obviously fun to spend,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'll give them a chance. And so when I go back, and I know some people there will be Bronco fans who will watch this and they'll say it's sacrilege that I said that there were people who hated Pat Bolin when he came in, but it's true, they did. When out of towner comes in and they bring all their money and you're like, who are these people? Who is this guy? And there's kind of that same thing with the current ownership, right? You're kind of like, okay, well, it's cool. You're spending some money on the team and all that, but yeah, like what are you all about the football team, or is this just a cash cow for you? What is it? But all I can say is that they seem to be pretty committed in the sense that, okay, we've got a coach like Super Bowl winning coach, and they put some capital into that, both monetarily and draft capital. And yeah, the turf, the scoreboard, the uniforms, which some people don't like, but hey, it was time to change the uniforms. I don't think they're that bad, really. The triangles are, yeah, they overdid it with all those triangles, maybe, but whatever.
I was gonna
Like,
ask you about that. The
yeah, they're fine. It's fine. Like, people need to stop. You know, it's like they've had those uniforms for 30 years, and it's not, it's hard to please everyone, right? It's impossible to please everyone. Now, if they had just gone with the straight throwback, that probably would have pleased most people.
yes,
But yeah, I kind of think, although I would love the throwback, I kind of think it's a little bit of a cop out of like, you need to put some kind of identity on what your team is right now.
yes, yeah,
And
you're right about that.
what will fix everyone's concern about those uniforms is if you go and have some success, because I am old enough to remember when the new uniforms came out back in 96, 97. We called it the orange crutch because it would, they had this orange thing down the side of these blue uniforms. So that was what they called it, the orange crutch
Yeah,
instead of orange crutch.
the point.
Yeah. Yeah. Which now you notice, so now when that uniform came out, people hated that uniform. I
Really?
remember, oh yeah.
Wow.
What's kind of funny, my dad, who was a longtime Broncos fan, rest his soul, he actually liked it because he liked the dark blue. But most people, this is pre-internet, but I remember it wasn't pre-internet. There was internet, but it was kind of limited. I would like go to the Denver Post website and read stuff or whatever. But most people kind of, that orange crutch, that was a derogatory thing that people said about it. It was not, people did not love that uniform, right? And it was very unusual for the time to have these like stripy things down the side. It's more commonplace now, but
It was
back
ahead
then
of its time.
it was. And the reason it became so like influential is because they promptly went and won 2 Super Bowls in those uniforms. So then all of a sudden, everybody's got stripy stuff on the side of their uniform. Everyone's got some sleek logo on the helmet. There are like many, many high schools who copied that uniform. There are still high schools to this day across the country who have, maybe they're called the so and so Mustangs or whatever, but they have that same horse head logo, which is it's a cool logo. They kept it because it's pretty cool.
It's
And even
awesome.
people who
You
want
can't
to go back to the D, like that D is weird. It's again sacrilege, right? But it's a little weird. Like he's got the thing coming out of the nose or whatever. This is a pretty sick logo, you got to admit. And the new uniforms, yeah, I don't love them. I don't think they're that great, but whatever. They look pretty good. I think people will think they look a lot better when they actually see players playing in them, and they're really going to like them if we can win some games. That will solve everything.
It's funny that you say some people didn't like him because when I was in first grade, I picked the Denver Broncos, and it was because of their uniforms. Because I grew up in Wisconsin, and we'd play football at recess, and my friends were the Packers, so we had to pick a different team because you can't be the Packers playing the Packers. That's not realistic. So we went to the library and we laid out every book, and me and Alex, we both just grabbed that Broncos book, and it's funny because that was it was ahead of its time. It just, for some reason, it was attractive. It was that logo. It wasn't the old school. It was this new look that I felt like they were the best uniforms in the NFL by far. But I was young, and so it's funny.
Yeah.
Um,
People didn't. So John Madden, and this tape probably exists somewhere, but there was a game that John Madden called, and it might have been even a preseason game, but John Madden said they were in the booth and somebody said he was doing a Broncos game, and he said, "Those uniforms look like they're not finished yet." There's this classic like John Madden line. Like they look like they're not finished yet. And
I
I
did
just,
hear his voice saying
yeah.
it.
But so no, not everybody loved that. Not everybody loves these. But you know what? Like you win some games, they're going to look great. They don't look that bad, and based on what we were hearing, I thought it was going to be they were going to have like mountains on the thing, and it was just I thought it was going to be atrocious. And when it came out, I was just kind of like, it's fine. Like it's fine. Get over it. People who want to like bellyache over it. It's like it's not that bad, and it was definitely time for a change. Yeah, it just
Y-
was.
there's certain combos of the new jerseys that I really like. I like the blue on blue. I like there was a couple of them that I was like, I hope they don't wear that one. But there was enough combinations where I was like, okay, we can. I think the white helmets look really good with it too.
You look pretty sick. Yeah.
Yeah, with the blue on blue with the white helmet.
Yeah.
But it I thought the same thing at first. I wanted the throwbacks to be, oh, let's just go back to what we were, and it just felt like we're all trying to relive, a moment that's gone. And the way I looked at it, a part of me was like, look, in a time where we don't have anything to be really happy about, remind us why we have endured all this pain. And the throwbacks are kind of that reminder, like, you haven't always been a bad team. You've had your good years, but I could see how the ownership group they want to create their own brand. But isn't that kind
And
of
don't
sometimes how
go ahead.
I was just gonna say sometimes that's how the history gets lost is people come in and they want to create their own branding. Like the Bears, they'll add stuff to their uniform, but they don't take away from what it was.
Right, but I think it's good that they at least they did bring out the throwback. So I think that's a pretty good move by them
I
overall.
agree.
I
I
think
agree.
you have the new thing. You have something. Here's something that when we watch Bo Nix play, yes, Bill, white helmets. But when we watch Bo Nix play, um, we're gonna see him in that uniform, and let's hope that Bo Nix is our next franchise quarterback, and that look that's going to identify him and his teammates as this era of the Broncos. Let's hope it's a good one. If it's a
Yeah.
bad one, maybe we'll be changing these uniforms in a few years. But but you also have the throwback, which will you know please some fans. But don't forget, we lost 4 Super Bowls in those uniforms, so don't
Wow.
forget. Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny, like, when you get nostalgic, you remember the good times, and sometimes you forget the bad times. Um, it's
right.
even like when you think back, it's harder to for me, it's harder to remember the bad times, easier to remember the good times. Um,
Yeah,
they did a study
it
on
was
this actually where they said if somebody goes on vacation, they go on vacation, right? It feels like they're at the airport forever, then they finally get where they're going, then they gotta take a taxi or an Uber to the airport. Then the vacation itself feels really short, and then they're back home at work. But then they ask those same people a month later, and the vacation felt long, and all of that travel is what feels short. So we tend to kind of remember the good and forget the bad.
right.
But
That's a good point, and that's why uh, don't get the illusion that you want to move to whatever place you went on vacation to, because when you move there, you're going to have to earn a living and go to work. Remember that when you were on vacation, you didn't have to work that whole time. That's why it was so
that's so
fun.
true.
But
Right.
but maybe kind of a similar analogy if we go back to those years with the Broncos, like there were some miserable times, losing, I mean, my whole childhood revolved around that team. Because my father was such a huge fan. And, I remember 1987, the year was actually 1988, but it was the 1987 season against the Washington Redskins. And the Broncos were supposed to be the best team in the league. Elway was MVP. We came out, we beat them. We were beating them in the first quarter, 10-0, and then they just got their asses kicked in the second quarter to the tune of like 35 points. It was 35-10 at the end
No.
of the second quarter. So, and to kind of relate this to a personal anecdote, that was the first time that I ever saw my father just hammered, shit-faced drunk. Was in the second half of that game, and it was not a pretty sight. It was not a pretty sight. And years later, 97, 98, and I remember my dad hugged me, and we hadn't been having a really good time, maybe for whatever reason. I was a young man, and maybe we weren't like seeing eye to eye, whatever.
Yeah.
And I just remember he put his arm around me and said, "We won," you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and so those are the things that stick with you as a fan. Like you grow up with it, and you relate these personal anecdotes to it. But for people who want to go back, and this was the point I was trying to make before I go off on the tangent, but for people who want to go back to those times of the uniforms, like there was a time when, you were wearing that orange jersey, and I remember going to school the next day, not living in Colorado at that time, going to school the next day with my Broncos jacket, blue jacket. If people saw that jacket now, they'd be like, "That's a sick jacket, right?" One of those old blue jackets with the
Yeah. The
stripes on
D.
the sleeve and the Denver D, right?
Oh,
And
yeah, I've been trying to get one of those.
wore that to school, got called a dork, right? Because it's just like day after the Broncos just got killed in the Super Bowl, right? That was
Yeah.
that's the uncoolest jacket you could have possibly worn. So don't forget those times. It's like you think people get nostalgic for something they didn't live through.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree, and I'm guilty of that too, but not so much because I didn't live through like my own great moments. It's because it's style, it's fashion, really. Fashion trends, they come and they go. I mean, everybody wore baggy clothes in the 2000s, and then everything was super skinny jeans in the 2010s, and then things got kind of normal. I call it normal now because it's normal now, but it's always normal now,
Right,
Um,
right,
but I think we're seeing kind of, whether it's your Miller Lite cans, it's kind of all going back to that retro look. Um,
right.
and I think that's what, I think that's what, at least for me, is why, like, I want the jacket. It's not for anything besides just like that look is, for me, it looks cool right now. I don't
Yeah,
know if you saw when the Broncos released the throwbacks, Patrick Surtain, he kind of was in
he's
that
wearing one of
video.
those jackets. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
If I'd
that
only
video
held
was
on to
so
that thing,
cool.
man. If I'd only held on to that jacket, I've got some sick like sweaters and stuff that my mom wore, like those old with the old helmet. I got those. I have those somewhere.
That's
But yeah, I
everything
mean
I
that stuff is really cool.
everything I buy now that's Broncos, I only get it on eBay because I don't want anything from NFL Shop, something that's just, one of 500. I like to go back and see, like, what is the one of one? Who's the daughter cleaning out her grandpa's closet? And it's like, oh, maybe someone will buy this shirt for $7. That, like, I got this coffee mug last week, which is like
Oh,
their
nice.
back-to-back
Rule
Super Bowl
33.
champion.
We
And
killed the Falcons. Yeah.
yeah, and it's cool because I grew up in Miami, and that's where that Super Bowl happened. So,
Yeah.
um,
That was a good memory for sure.
and
So
Bill
MVP, yeah.
Bill said 87 was a strike year. It was a screwy season. I get it.
Yeah, there were
And
a couple. So our Scabs won, I think, 2 games because there was 2 strike games, and I think our Scabs won both games. And I think the Redskins Scabs won both of their games too, if I recall correctly. But I should have repeated. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was an interesting year. But of course, I remember the year before that, and that was the first time the Broncos had been to the Super Bowl in a while. Broncos were actually leading 10-9 at the half, and there was a contested catch in the end zone by Clarence Kay, old tight end Clarence Kay, who had caught the ball, like basically picked it up off of the turf, and it was called incomplete. But then they showed uh, replay from the end zone angle that showed that he did indeed catch it, but we had to punt. I mean,
Oh,
it wasn't in the end zone, but it was from our own end zone. We had to punt. But
would that been ruled a catch today?
they would have reviewed it and it would have been a catch. I mean, you would have been able to challenge it, would have been a catch 100%.
Do you feel
But,
like
you
they're
know, so
overturning too many things nowadays?
what's that?
Do you feel like they're overturning too many plays? Like, you slow the
Uh,
camera down so much, and then a ball
mm,
makes a micro movement, and they're like, "That's incomplete," but you watch the play, it was a damn catch. Like, you see this all the time. I
yeah,
get a little frustrated when it's like, okay, the ball moved an inch, and it's like, even if it's, even if it's a
yeah.
neutral game and I don't have a dog in the fight, it's still sometimes it seems like our technology is a little ridiculous. Like, at the end of
It
the
it
day,
it
did it
does
look
get
like
pretty
a catch?
granular. It gets pretty granular in the way they're able to look. I mean, because we have so many more pixels now, and you're able to see, exactly. It's just like, they see that blade of grass? Is this above the blade of grass? But I ultimately, I got to admit, I don't really mind it as long as they get it right. And there are times when they review something and I feel like they still got it wrong. And I'm like, well, why did we bother with that? Like, get it right. That's all I really care about. Get it right. And no, let's not review every single play, but let's review the crucial plays. Let's just make sure we get them right. That's the way I feel about it.
I went to the Broncos season opener last year, actually 2 years in a row now. It was against the Raiders last year, and I was walking back to my car, and I was walking with one of the crew chiefs, that was officiating in the game. And I got to talk to him a little bit, and I just asked him, I was like, "When am I ever gonna be in this opportunity ever again?" So I just asked him, if it's rigged, I was like, or do people and he kinda laughed about it like that too, and he said, "I can I can't tell you, like, what's going on in other places, but I can just tell you with, like, full transparency that nobody wants to be the guy that misses a call." And I could just I believed him, it seemed really authentic. Like, nobody's out here to some of these conspiracy people are just ridiculous. Like, you see, people were saying that the NFL was going to do whatever it took to get the Chiefs into the Super Bowl. I'm not really, I mean, I could understand
If
that.
that's the case, they're not calling a wide receiver offside. You're not getting offsides on the offense. I mean, come on. Like, I
Right.
so I mean, who knows if, like, because people said the NBA was rigged for years, right? And people are saying like this, yeah, this is rigged, and these refs are, but and then I was always the one who said, come on, like, I'm dismiss conspiracy theories. But then you have an NBA ref coming out and saying, well, yeah, I was crooked and I did do, and you're like, well, okay, like,
So once in a
so
while, yeah.
yeah, so it's like, I mean, I'm not gonna say unequivocally there's nothing untoward happening with these refs, but again, I think you can point to situations where the calls don't go their way, and poor little Patrick Mahomes has a little meltdown. Like, I think those things might prove that maybe the Chiefs aren't getting all the calls, even though sometimes it seems like they do.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, the NFL is a business, and the viewership with the Chiefs in the Super Bowl was so much higher than the year after where the Rams and Bengals were in the Super Bowl. So naturally, I think if it's like a call that could go either way, maybe it leans towards the Chiefs, but that's a totally different conversation than the flag is being thrown for the Chiefs to begin with. All right. It's like, I don't think, like, they'll go back and look at plays and be like, oh, it's like, okay, everybody's in on it. How is that possible? How could everybody be in on it? Because that's the only way for it to work. It's like,
Well,
it,
that's the same thing with all conspiracy theories, is that most of them require, disparate people to somehow cooperate. When, like, if anyone who's ever worked a job knows that people who are supposed to cooperate don't cooperate effectively. So when you have conspiracy theories, it's like the Democrats are working with the Republicans, and you know this country's working with that country, and it's like Democrats can't work with Democrats.
Right.
Republicans can't work with Republicans. Why do you think all of a sudden these disparate people have somehow conspired together? It doesn't hold water usually. So,
It makes me so
I
happy
agree
to
with
hear
you
you
there.
say that. Um, well, I kind of asked everything about the current state of the Broncos. So just like to, I guess, close this off. Not that I'm on any time or anything, but I just
No,
wanted
I
to hear
I
some.
appreciate it because I am going to go to bed sooner or later. So yeah.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite Bronco moments that you've experienced? If I say that, like, what are a couple that just like come to mind right away?
Oh gosh. It's funny when you said that. I thought of the 2005 season, and I don't know why, because I have a lot of good seasons to look back on. But the 2005 season, if you remember, didn't
I do.
start out that great. And then Champ Bailey had this great interception return for a touchdown against the Chargers. And we
Yes,
won
I
that
was just
game.
talking about this.
And we just took off from there, right? That was a great season. That was a fantastic. That defense was amazing. Plummer, he if you look at his numbers, it's nothing incredible, but he led the team, and obviously a great running game as we always had back in those days, and came up short against the Steelers. But man, that was a good season, man. That was a really good season, really fun season to watch. Of course, the first two Super Bowls, and I already explained that whole thing of my whole sad history of watching them lose three with Elway. I wasn't old enough to remember the '77 season. I mean, I was alive, but not conscious of what was happening. But the '85 was the first one that I was old enough to watch and understand. And then to see them lose those three, and then '97, '98, and then just watching Terrell Davis run, who was Terrell Davis was amazing. And of course, the drive. So I do remember the drive. When the drive happened, for whatever reason, I was watching it alone at my house, and I was a kid. I mean, maybe my mom was there, but she was off doing something else. My dad wasn't there for some reason, so I watched the. I've got my family in here. I think trying to get in here, but I watched. I watched the game, and I watched that incredible drive. I saw it live, and I had no one to share it with. I was just like,
Oh,
yes, like, and they won the game. And so I remember, and this is back in the day. It's like I couldn't go to the internet and be like, what are people saying about the game? Right? That was so. I
yeah.
remember
Wow, it's so different.
I picked up the phone and I called one of my friends, because you had to remember the number of your friend or whatever. And I called one of my friends from school, and I called him and I said, the Broncos are going to the Super Bowl. He's like, yeah, I saw the game, because he wasn't a Broncos fan. And he was like, yeah, I saw it. The Broncos are going to the Super Bowl. He's like, yeah, okay, bye. It was just like, but I had to tell somebody, and I think I talked to my dad about it later. I can't remember where he was, but anyway,
The 2005 interception, Champ Bailey against the Patriots, that ended up being a safety or a touchback because he
yeah.
fumbled the ball out.
Oh, against the Patriots, right, right.
That's definitely on my like favorite moments. And then also Tim Tebow to Demaryius Thomas
Oh,
in
of
that
course.
Steelers game. And that was one where I ran outside screaming and telling people that didn't care. I was
Yeah,
in Florida at the time, so
yeah.
but yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all your wisdom and history, and a lot of great points about the uniforms and how the same people that called you a dork for wearing that are the same people that want to go back to it now. It's a good perspective to have. And you really came in clutch because I had a person bail and I put out a Reddit thread and you jumped on it. So I really appreciate you doing that. And if you ever want to check out some of the other interviews, you can see them on this YouTube channel. I'll send you a link
I'll do
after.
that. Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to check it out. So I will definitely do that. And I'm happy to do it. And anytime, if sometime down the road you want me to come on again, maybe we can talk about how Bo Nix had a great season and we're going to the Super Bowl. Invite me back. We can talk about that.
I'll definitely have you back, and you've been like the best guest that I've had. So I really
Well, thank you. I
appreciate it.
appreciate it.
All
Thank you
right.
very much, Kyle.
Yep. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.